Hello, and welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're really excited because we have a special guest and we're talking about handling pressure. Our guest is Dr. Hank Weisinger, who is the New York Times bestselling author of Performing Under Pressure, The Science of Doing Your Best When It Matters. And he's here to talk with us about stress and anxiety in law school. I'm Allison Monahan, one of your Law School Toolbox hosts. And if you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today we're very excited to have a renowned expert on handling pressure with us, Dr. Hank Weisinger. Dr. Weisinger is the New York Times bestselling author of Performing Under Pressure, The Science of Doing Your Best When It Matters Most, like, for example, in law school. Since one of the biggest challenges for many law students is handling stress, whether it's the day-to-day variety or specifically test anxiety, he's got a lot to offer for any law student. So let's get started. First off, I'm just curious how you became interested in this topic about handling pressure. What about this interests you?
I actually got interested in the subject when I was a graduate student doing a clinical internship out at UCLA and the Brentwood VA Hospital. I was working on a ward that was exclusively designed for Vietnam veterans, and this is all the way back in 1976. And I had one patient who I gave the task of calling his mother in Brooklyn to tell her that he was ready to be discharged from the hospital. And I gave him 3 minutes to make the phone call. I said, if you cannot do this in 3 minutes, I'll take the phone away. And after about 30 seconds, I could hear, without the voice on the telephone, I could hear his mother bombarding him with statements like, how can they be so stupid? You're sick, you're disturbed. And literally, in front of me, he started to choke.
Wow.
He started to physically become aroused. He started sweating, stammering. I had to take the phone away.
Huh.
Now, I tucked that memory away over the next 10, 15 years, but it always stuck in my mind of what was really happening to him, what was going through his mind. And then when I moved from L.A. to the East Coast in Connecticut, being a diehard Yankee fan, I started watching the Yankee games every single day, just like I was growing up. And I will tell you, if I was not an expert in anger management, I've written some books on that subject as well, I would have broken my TV set.
Wow.
And because I saw my favorite team always blowing games, striking out, and I started to wonder, how come some people can rise to the occasion and other people always choke? And as I started to explore that really out of personal interest, I came across a few revelations. And one of them was the Yankee players really were not choking. They just weren't very good. It would be like a C student taking his LSATs and getting upset that he has an average score. But that's what average students do.
Right.
Average students do not all of a sudden do great. And that was a very important revelation.
That's actually a very interesting distinction, because you think like, oh, you're going to, everybody chokes. It's like, you're right. Some people just aren't actually either that well qualified for what they're doing, or they haven't prepared enough, or, they're just frankly not that good at taking the LSAT. So that is yeah, go ahead. I would say that is an interesting distinction, because you think like, oh, it's always these high achievers. But it's like, yeah, maybe you're just not that great at this to begin with.
I think that is a really important insight for law students, which we'll come back to in a sec. But what the finding was is that nobody rises to the occasion. The idea of thinking of like Clutch, there was one of my favorite movies was called The Natural with Robert Redford. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the movie, he's up, in a situation all baseball fans can recognize. It's the game's on the line, the best player's up, and in the movie, he hits a home run. Well, in the book, by the same title, he struck out. That's reality.
Right,
People do not rise to the occasion. A C student is never getting 1,600 on their SATs.
Right. I think
But an
that's
A student,
Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting pieces of your work is that you do have this idea of like, oh, if you just focus, you can do even better under pressure. But you're basically saying that's not really ever true, right?
exactly. That, first of all, you can't do better than your best anyway.
Right.
And what happens to many people is they start to think, oh, I have to prove myself. Now I got into the school, now I have to show that I am worthy of. No, you've already done that. That's why the person has already gotten in. So what I found is that when you look at athletes such as Michael Jordan, nobody does better under pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It impacts our cognitive success tools, judgment, decision making, memory, attention. Think all of those are critical to be successful in a profession such as laws. More so even in law school probably than in the practice of law, where you have more time. So people do badly, poorly, less than under pressure. So the goal was to help people not do better than their best, but to immunize themselves to the negative effects of pressure, because that's really the best that you can do.
Right. So our
And once
goal
I
here
made
is
that,
basically like not to screw it up. It's not to go to some next level where I'm going to be like the A plus student. It's like, well, if I've studied really hard for this exam, I know everything that's on it. My only goal in terms of the pressure aspect is just not to screw it up.
exactly. It's like if you're getting an A on a practice exam, in the final exam, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be basically the same thing. The choke would be all of a sudden if you get a C.
Right.
If you get, it's like when I say, well, it's like a kid who graduates first in his class, and then he takes in high school, and then he takes goes to college, and he graduates first in his class in college, and then he takes his LSATs, and he gets the highest mark, and people say, wow, he really came through. He didn't come through. He's just
He's
doing
been
what he
pretty
always does.
consistent. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the key. And when you make that distinction, it takes a lot of pressure off because you stop trying to exceed your capabilities.
Right. I mean, I know for me, the worst grade I ever got in any school I ever did was second semester of organic chemistry, where I think I got like a D plus on the final and like a C minus in the class or something. But I was frankly happy I passed it because I just stopped studying halfway through. So I was like, yeah, of course I can't expect to walk in there and get an A. Like I was really just happy to get out alive and decided not to go to med school. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's an interesting point because I think people in law school, particularly, they put so much pressure on themselves about like, because it is, it's a very, I mean, you probably know this, but it's a very strange educational experience in that you're getting basically no feedback. You're typically not getting, your whole grade is based on this exam at the end of the semester, and you're not really practicing for that typically. And so people are like, and then of course it's graded on the curve, so you're competing with all of your classmates. So it's inherently a very high pressure, high stakes situation. And some people have scholarships they're dealing with, and they know that jobs are going to ride on the outcome of this exam. So it's kind of the perfect storm, really, for like, people having just total crack ups and breakdowns.
Okay. One of the ways my nephew went to law school, and I took a lot of pressure off him right at the beginning when I said, you got to know two things. One, you're never going to argue a case before the Supreme Court. And two, there's zero chance that you are in the top 10% of your graduating class. And once he recognized that, the mission became just get through, pass the bar, and get a job that he was interested in. And that was it.
Right. I mean,
I feel sorry for those.
Yeah, that's a healthy
I feel
outcome.
sorry for those kids who are driven and think that they're going to law school and then they have to be, number one. I know it's counterintuitive, but one of the ways that I found most effectively, and not just for law school students, but also for med school, as well, and any undergraduates, whether they're undergraduates in college or in high school, is you have to forget about the grades. The more you think about grades and the more important you make them, ironically, the more pressure you create and the worse you do.
Right. And that's one of the things
And
we
I
talk to students with fairly early on is, we give, like, our tutoring students, for example, we give them a sort of an intake questionnaire. And it is this thing about the more they're like, we're like, what are your goals? And if they tell me their goal is to get an A in every class, it's like, well, you need to have a serious conversation with someone about this, because A, that's not going to happen. And B, it's not helpful. Like, you control your inputs, you don't control your outputs in this situation. So, you can control something like, I want to study X number of hours per day, or I want to feel well prepared when I walk into the exam, but you can't control the grade your professor gives you. And it's just sort of pointless to even think about it.
Absolutely. It's out of your, because what happens is the more you start thinking about your grade and you start thinking about, well, what if I don't do well? Now I'm not going to get that internship. I'm not going to get that job. I have no chance of making law review. You're thinking of all those, what we call worry thoughts, worry cognitions, when in reality your energy would be better off studying studying your homework.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
it will have a much more powerful influence. So it's very counterintuitive, but one of the things I want people to remember is to minimize the importance of the situation. Minimize or shrink the importance of the test. Many students feel what I call primal pressure. They have equated at some level that if they don't get a great grade, they will, quote, be weeded out, which becomes exaggerated, and they think their life is over. It's like the high school student coming home, oh, I only got 690 on my verbal SATs. I'm not going to get into Harvard. My life is over. And we tell if it's our kid, as I've told my kids many times, you stop catastrophizing. Your life isn't over. That could be the same thing if they didn't get invited to a party. My life
Right.
is over.
Well, I think
So,
lawyers are particularly bad about that. I mean, I have a friend who's an ex-lawyer who works with people who want to transition out of the law, and she says, it's crazy. You've got these people who are incredibly capable, highly educated, have tons of skills they can use in all different ways, and inevitably they come in and they say, I can't stop being a lawyer because I'll end up living under a bridge. And she's like, you're not going to end up homeless. Like, that's just, can we like
exactly.
have a conversation that's actually rational here? Like, I understand the fear, but we kind of have to deal with this fear that you're going to literally end up living under a bridge, despite all evidence to the contrary, until you can actually do something about like what you want to change about your life.
That's right. And another important thing I have found is that many people confuse pressure and stress.
Huh.
They are not the same.
Tell me
Even
more about that.
academics. The I would say, and I find that when you do confuse the two, and I'll distinguish, is that your life is on high alert 24/7. Now, during the semester, a law student is under a lot of stress, which basically means there's a lot of demands made upon you, and you don't necessarily feel you have the resources to respond. So if I have 5 exams, all in the course of a week, that week is very stressful. There's a lot of demands on me, and I don't have the resources, i.e. the amount of hours maybe, to respond, so I am feeling overwhelmed. When people say they're stressed out, that's what that means. They're feeling overwhelmed, and usually you feel a sense of exhaustion, and you tend to get irritable very quickly.
Yes, definitely.
On the
There are a
other
lot of
hand,
irritable people running around law schools and exam week.
that's right.
For sure.
That's right. So you got a bunch of tests, and they're all it's stressful. But pressure is when you actually go in the classroom and you have to now deliver the goods. So
Okay.
pressure is a situation when you have something on the line, and the outcome is based on your performance. And I'm saying that in those situations, people usually do below their capability for many reasons. One is because they're thinking about the grade and the negative consequences. What if I don't do well? If I am taking a final exam on contracts, the only thing I want in my mind, which is the memory, which we call working memory. It's like having an iPad.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people have bigger iPads than others. So if you have gone, I'll tell you one thing. If you have gone to like an Ivy League law school, then I would be willing to bet that the students who go to an Ivy League law school have a bigger iPad, more cognitive horsepower than the student who goes to a second tier or third tier law school.
Mm-hmm.
However, if that first tier law student chokes, performs below his capability, he or she is now equal to the student who's in the second tier law school who can really handle pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an interesting point for people to remember, because what happens is as soon as I sit down and the professor gives me the test, I look at the first question and I say, I don't know this, I'm in trouble. Now I don't get that job, I needed an A. All of a sudden, time is passing away. And I'm wasting all those minutes on worrying about something that is actually in the future, rather than taking a deep breath, remaining focused, clearing my mind, following my testing strategy. That's what I need to be doing. That's one of the reasons people perform below their capability in tasks that involve judgment and decision-making and information processing. They're thinking about other things. So part of learning how to deal with pressure is to minimize distracting thoughts in the moment of truth.
I'm curious about that. I mean, that sounds great in theory. If I'm listening to this as a law student, I'm like, yeah, I'd love to be able to just go and sit down and not think about anything else. But I mean, do you have any suggestions on how people can actually do that?
I do.
Okay.
I do. First I want people also remember the difference between stress and pressure. And a good take out is this, that anytime you're feeling, I'm under a lot of pressure, ask yourself, do I feel overwhelmed, or do I feel I have to deliver a particular and effective response? And if you're feeling overwhelmed, you have a lot of different strategies. You can relax, you can take a break. You can't take a break during an exam.
Well, you can take a little break. You can take a bathroom
mini break. Yes, a cognitive break, but you're not going to go out for a walk.
No. But I do think it's actually, some people, sometimes people have like a 4-hour test and they think like, I can't go to the bathroom because I'll run out of time. It's like, that 5 minutes that you, or 2 minutes, whatever, could actually be pretty helpful.
It would be very helpful, not just pretty helpful. It would be very helpful. But what happens is, you're right. People get in that mind frame, I can't take the 5 minutes and so on, because they are equating it as a do or die situation, which for your ancestor was true.
Right.
If your ancestor, if early man didn't perform in a do or die situation, he died.
Right. You're not going to take a bathroom break if like a lion's chasing you.
That's right. But if you get a C on a test, it might feel like you're dying, but the reality is you will live to take another test.
Okay, so you're talking about dealing with stress. I think that's really helpful to people. So you can do things, yoga, mindfulness, like running, whatever.
Exactly. So don't treat every stressful moment as though it's a do or die moment. That's what I want people to realize. How many times have I come home, I got to get to the cleaners before they close at 5 o'clock, and I'm driving myself nuts until I realize, you know what, I don't need those clothes. Now I'll get them tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's a lot. I mean, law students have so much on their plate, and I think they tend to be sort of type A overachieving types anyway. So I remember, for example, once I had this day that was just like completely insane. It was like my busiest possible day, from like 7 in the morning until literally like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I was completely scheduled. I was running events. I had like, all this stuff. And I got horrible food poisoning the night before. And I ended up spending the entire day at the like health clinic getting an IV drip because I was so sick. And, all this stuff happened anyway. I didn't actually need to be there for any of it. And, like, not only that, I ended up getting called on in, like, 2 different classes randomly. And, my roommate was just like, hey, she's, like, really sick. She's getting an IV. And they're like, okay. So it's like we put all this pressure and, I don't know, is that stress or pressure? I guess we put pressure on ourselves and cause stress. Is that how it works out?
Yes. No. We experience stress and we call it pressure.
Okay.
That's the thing. So you think that every stressful moment is that you have to perform. It's a do or die. Your life is dependent on it. So what? It's not a pressure moment that I get a paper done tonight if it's not due for another week. So if I just relax a little, I'll end up actually doing better and easily meeting the deadline. Now that set aside, there's 2 types of pressure I think that law students experience. One are daily feelings, even when they're not taking an exam. It's just relentless. And I think that is also what most people in the corporate world are experiencing. And any attorney who is in private practice is feeling that, because the pressure is, I got to feed myself. I have to get more clients. So they have everyday pressure feelings, and then there are the pressure of the moment. In terms of the first one, I want the students who are listening to think, why did you go to law school in the first place? And
I'm not sure a lot of them could answer that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've heard all sorts of answers, but I like to think the answer is, well, they want to be a lawyer.
Right.
And then what happens is they lose sight of that, and everything becomes grades, grades, grades. So if people remember their purpose and what their mission is to be the best lawyer possible, I have found everything else starts to fall into play, and you lose a lot of those daily pressure feelings. So that is one thing, is that it is also a way to renew your enthusiasm. And also, I found that law students should be focusing on their interests as well, not necessarily their grades. I mean, I don't want to offend anybody listening, but I have met many people, my friends and other people in social situations who have gone to great law schools, and they don't know what they're doing with their life. So you got to remember what your interests are, because when you focus on what you're interested in, what part of the law are you interested in, then you become more and more curious, and learning then becomes a sense of fun, not necessarily a sense of, I have to do this. I have found that the best students at the best schools many times do not even consider it pressure, because they're doing what they are interested in. And the third thing I want them to remember is, most law students are very competitive because they're trying to beat the other guy.
Yeah.
I once said to my kids, there's always somebody smarter. There's always somebody prettier. There's always a better athlete. There's always somebody who has more money. So comparing yourself to how other students are doing, and you can't control that. I cannot control whether the kid next to me is going to study 15 hours a day. All I can do is focus on myself. So a big differential for people who can actually enjoy law school, which for most people they think that's fantasy.
Impossible.
They can actually thrive in it rather than be depressed by it, is to focus on your own excellence rather than ranking yourself to other people. It'd be like me with my book, comparing myself to other people whose books are more successful and will always be more successful. That will make me miserable. But if I focus just on doing the best I can, writing the best book that I can do, then I actually end up feeling good about myself and probably making a better work to begin with. Now, that set aside, for those daily strategies, there's some very specific evidence-based solutions that I think can help all law students when they have to take a test, when they have to give a presentation, when they have a mock trial. And the first one, which will sound kind of hokey, is actually very effective, and that is, before you have a big test or a presentation, to literally the night before write down your anxieties and concerns on a piece of paper.
Huh. Do you think that actually helps? I know sometimes people are sort of afraid if they give voice to something, like, I don't know, it'll make it real, or they'll have to really acknowledge it. I mean, is that the point?
The main explanation, you've got to get it out of your system. Those are worry thoughts.
Right. They tend to be kind of amorphous until you really define them.
How many times have you had a problem, you talk about it to one of your girlfriends, one of your friends?
Your therapist.
You're talking about it for the whole day, and then you reach a point where, you know what, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm sick of talking about it. That is the logic, that you have gotten those worry thoughts out of your system. So in the moment of truth, because you've already exhausted all these anxieties, all these fears, they are less likely to surface in the moment. And also, as you pointed out, it allows you to challenge them. You know, well, I'm afraid if I don't do this, I won't get that summer intern job. Yes, so? You know, why is that so important? Oh, my parents will be disappointed. And law students get a lot of pressure from their parents, especially if their parents are paying the bill.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are used to looking for that external validation, and I think one of my personal feeling is because so many people kind of end up in law school as a default that they haven't really. It was intriguing what you were saying earlier about like think about your motivations, and I sort of joked that most people couldn't tell you, but I think there's some truth to that because really it's like, oh well, this is just something either someone else thinks is a good idea or it seems like it would be prestigious, like they're lawyers and law students are all obsessed with prestige, which is basically external validation, which, as we're talking about, you don't really control. And I mean, I can tell you from experience is not actually something that's really guaranteed to make you happy. My first semester, I did really well. I was like top of my class. And then I ended up clinically depressed. So it's not like, and I think part of that was the stress and the pressure, but also it was just a sort of realization like, hey, getting an A in Civ Pro actually did not make my life better. Like,
right.
I'm not a happier person because of that. I'm actually more stressed out because of it.
Well, yeah, once you get one A, it also creates the expectation there should be more.
Oh, no, that was that was straight up what it was. It was just like I had a complete breakdown, basically stopped going to class because I couldn't handle the idea that I was supposed to continue doing well.
Right.
And because I had no real idea like what I was doing in law school anyway. It was kind of a snap decision to go. So it wasn't, I look at my law school roommate who was really into public interest work and actually didn't even look at her grades after the first semester. She just had a friend check to make sure she didn't fail. And she was doing what you were talking about. She was following her interests. She was taking classes that she found really interesting and like she wanted to know. And so she was very internally motivated. And as a result, was probably one of the happier people I knew in law school.
And that reminds me of another good strategy based on what you are saying that I think is very important because in the law school culture, everybody gets so used to defining their self-worth around grades. So another very important strategy that is shown to be very effective is before you have a big pressure moment, is to step back and remember that you have worth as an individual irrespective of how you do on a test. I made it a point always to tell my kids that their grades had nothing to do with how I valued them, how much I loved them, and whatever. And that's very important to remember. It's like when I would give a presentation, I used to say, even if I screw up this presentation, I'm still a good person. Too many people, so if you get a bad grade, I'm a failure. And if I get a good grade, I'm a wonderful person. And it's very important not to hook your self-esteem and self-worth into the outcome of your performance. And a lot of people in law school make that mistake because everything again revolves around the grades. But it only revolves around the grades if you make them the most important thing in the in the world.
Right, exactly.
So that is another strategy. I think another good strategy for people is when they're in the moment taking a test, because many people then get rattled and they're really nervous, is to take a few seconds right at the beginning to tune into your senses. Start to pay attention to your breathing. When people start to panic, the fastest way of regaining control over yourself is to start to control your breathing.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite, I won't say one of my favorite movies, but a good movie to illustrate this was that movie with George Clooney, where they're marooned in outer space with Sandra Bullock, and I forgot, Gravity. And she starts flipping out as the astronaut, and the first thing he says to her is breathe. Same thing Navy SEALs would tell somebody.
Yeah, same thing your yoga instructor would tell you.
That's right, same thing. So when you sit down at that desk and you open that test booklet, it's a good idea to sit back and start to regulate your breathings and to look around, because if you look around the room and concentrate on what you are seeing, it will keep you in the moment. You can't be in the moment and simultaneously worry about failing.
I mean, do you
So
think
that
these are
becomes
things,
something.
do you think people should practice these techniques? I mean, how do you suggest, say you're someone we get a lot of students or questions from students who are like, I know I struggle with test anxiety. What do I do? I mean, should they be doing mindfulness practice? Like, should they be taking practice tests?
Well, all that helps, but what I want people also to remember is that a lot of people who have test anxiety actually have an anxiety disorder. So they are behind the eight ball to begin with. It's like if you can't handle. I had a friend once in graduate school. He couldn't sit still. He was always getting up. Now I met him in graduate school. He was really an undergraduate, but he had been in the working world. Came back to school, and one day we're all sitting around watching a football game, and he comes in, and this guy could not sit still for 2 minutes. And the first thing he says is, I've decided I want to go and be an air traffic controller. And we all became hysterical. It was like, are you out of your mind? So a student, first of all, who experiences a lot of stress and anxiety, I don't even think that they would have the option to get into law school. Because if you're experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety to begin with, I don't think it's very hard to be a good student.
Well, I think for a lot of
everything.
people, I think what happens with a lot of people is they can sort of get through to a certain point. So they can get through undergrad and maybe, they're not taking classes that have a lot of tests. They're doing papers and things like that. And so I think what happens sometimes is they get to law school and suddenly they are really confronted with the limitations of, their kind of nature in a sense. I mean, do you think these people should just avoid law school entirely and look for a lower stress career?
I think in their best interest, to me, the most important thing is to enjoy what you're doing. And then you can always figure out how to make money out of it, is the advice I gave my nephews. One is a lawyer, one is a physician. The difference is the one who's a physician loves being a doctor. The one who's a lawyer feels a little differently about his occupation.
That's a whole other podcast.
I think that's I think you need to go into the situation knowing that you're going to have a lot of support groups, and you're going to have to manage that anxiety. But remember, what anxiety is: uncertainty. So if a law student said to me they have test anxiety with this test coming up, I'd point out, well, anxiety is uncertainty. So what are you uncertain about? Mm-hmm. And then the person will say, well, I'm uncertain about how you're going to do it. Okay, then study more and practice. Most law students do not know how to practice for a case presentation or for an exam.
Oh, they never. It's unbelievable. I'm like a broken record on this.
Right.
We're like, you got to practice. Oh, but I don't know enough of the law to practice. It's like, no, you have to practice. That's how you learn this.
And it's not only the act of practicing; it's mixing it up. Abraham Lincoln was a great lawyer because he knew his opponent's case better than the opponent. I used to work when I was out at UCLA with some of the law students getting ready for a bar. And I would say, okay, look, present a case and then rip it apart. And then to be able to present the other person, your opponent's case better than your opponent. Mm-hmm. That's the key. Because if you can do that, then there is zero anxiety. So people have to mix up their practice. If you're used to making point 1, point 2, point 3, after you have the house down call, start with point 3. Start with point 2. It's like anticipating. They always say, don't ask a question for an attorney that you don't know the answer to.
Oh, yeah.
So that becomes another thing. Anticipate. I used to love taking, when I was in graduate school, essay exams because I anticipated every possible question they could ask.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
we encourage people, get your professor's old exams. If you look at 5 of them, you basically know 80% of what they're going to ask you because they can't come up with any new questions. So at that point, stop worrying about it. You know what they're going to ask you, just do it.
Exactly. And so, when you say what is the best thing for people to do, you obviously have to learn how to regulate your emotions. I think law students and everybody are better off, you talk about mindfulness, of being able to tune in to how you're talking to yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes before you are having a mock trial or taking a test, are your thoughts helping, or are they making it worse?
Yeah.
And because most people are not tuned into listening to themselves, they become oblivious to that. And as a result, their thoughts start to work against them. And not to be too self-promoting, but I do have a online course that
Well, I
I
was just going
believe
to
will
ask you about
benefit.
that. So if somebody's listening to this, they're like, this sounds great. I really want to learn more. Where can they look?
They can follow me at pressuretweets.com for more information, and they can check out the page that describes the course at pressure.henryweisinger.phd.com.
We'll put all this on the
Pressure
show
dot.
notes.
That would be great. I think people will find it very enjoyable. And you know what? Because I want, as a psychologist, my mission is to actually help people. It is priced so low that people cannot afford not to take it.
Yeah, and they can also
I
check
think
out your
it'll.
book, right? That's on Amazon or
Yeah,
wherever.
and they can
So,
check out a book. They have enough things to read. The course is very entertaining
oh,
in
good.
terms of some of the videos, and it's self-paced, and plus there's a money-back guarantee. I don't want to sound like a lawyer, but you get your money back. I found that one of the things law students have to remember is they're going into a profession, unlike many others. You get a new car. If you don't like it, there's a part you get a refund. The great thing about a lawyer is even if you lose a case, you don't have to give a refund. I think that's one of the great things
Yeah, and
that
ideally you get paid up front too. So there you go.
exactly, especially if you are a criminal attorney.
Or a
And
family
you know what? The
lawyer.
other thing I would tell, and I don't want to hear people saying that they don't have time or whatever, but when you're a law student, what are the things that you are reading are not necessarily for fun. They are not necessarily the most interesting things. My nephew told me the first year of law school was basically all rote memory, and in terms of the learning. So, John Grisham's got a great book out now called The Rogue Attorney.
Hmm.
And I find taking a break and reading a fun novel about an attorney can be inspirational, give people a fresh perspective on their life, and add some enjoyment.
Yeah.
Every law student has the right to be confident, optimistic, and enthusiastic.
And one of the things we
And
sometimes say is like, look, this is a privilege. So many people in the world would love to be doing what you're doing, and to be there and be so miserable and so stressed out and feeling all this terrible pressure and choking. Like, this is a privilege to be in law school. Like, you've got to figure out a way that you've got to figure out techniques basically to help you be okay, because this is not something you're not being tortured. No one's forcing you to be there.
exactly. And I think that, you know what? I'm glad you said that, Allison, because the biggest difference between people who do well under pressure and people who perform below their capability is how they perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that people who do well perceive it as an opportunity, fun, and a challenge. And people who do poorly perceive it as a threat.
Hmm.
So, for the first year law student, you're coming in. If some law students see, oh, this is threatening, it's so competitive, I got to be on high alert. Those are the people I would predict are not going to do their best. The person who goes in and has that attitude, man, this is a privilege and an opportunity, and I'm in a great place, and I'm going to really have fun learning. Those are the students who tend to do the best.
Yeah, I try to look at exams as a game. Like, this is a puzzle I have to figure out. It wasn't like, oh, I mean, of course, like, I wanted to do well, but ultimately when it sat down, it was like, this is just a game. This is a game I'm playing, and I have to figure out, the best way to do it.
Exactly, because you're seeing it as a challenge rather than something threat. That is really a great mindset to have, and other students would take heed to model that.
Well, unfortunately, with that, we are out of time. Thank you very much, Dr. Weisinger. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and a rating on iTunes. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out to me at Allison at Law School Toolbox, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. And if you'd like to reach Dr. Weisinger, you can visit his website at www.drhenryweisinger.com. We'll put that in the show notes so you can spell it. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon, and don't let the pressure get you down.